Alright folks, welcome back to the shop here. What we've got today, we're going to disassemble a Glock pistol. 99% of these things all come apart the exact same way. I'm going to try and do a couple more pistols for you. I've been doing a lot of long guns, I think. But I'm going to do this guy here. Almost, like I said, almost all these Glocks are going to come apart the exact same way, except for some earlier generations don't have this locking block pin here. I believe the Gen 5s did away with this too, because we're now, what, Gen 5 I think is the new one's out. That they've done all kinds of things that most of the parts in the Gen 5s are not interchangeable with all the older generations, so they're doing a lot of changing in them. I'm not a huge fan of Glock. Not that there's anything wrong, I think they're great guns, reliable and relatively accurate. My problem is with Gaston Glock himself and his business practices. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, he was an engineer, had a pretty good background in polymers, modern polymers, but his business really produced, they were doing automotive stuff like radiators, things like that. They were doing curtain rods, and he picked up a small contract for Austria to produce e-tools and bayonets or fighting knives for him. And that kind of got his foot in the door. So the military commands up there all really kind of knew who he was already. And so he started working on a pistol when Austria was trying to replace their P-38s, I believe it was. And so there was a bunch of extensive tests. Glock's Model 17 was introduced and tested and tested and tested, and they ended up finally adopting that. I'm really not going to go through a lot of the history on this because you can just Google the shit out of it. There's actually there's a whole book about this. Yeah, Gaston Glock, his company, the guns. The reason they called it the Model 17 because that was actually Gaston Glock's 17th design, not pistol design, but 17th patent in general, his actual engineered design. And all the rest of these pistols kind of follow that same venture, though the model number pretty well indicates where it fell in line in its design with the rest of the models. Oh man, I still need some more coffee. When I start talking about his business practices and the company itself, there's another thing too, man. Glock fanboys, those hardcore Glock fanboys are, in my opinion, worse than the 1911 fanboys. Just whatever, man. Y'all. Bleh. But one of my other issues that I have with the guns is I don't shoot particularly well with them. They don't fit my hands well. I have to make some conscious movements to get sight alignment and things like that, where I don't have that issue with many other manufacturers. Beretta, Springfield, Sig, Smith & Wesson, Colts, you know, the 1911 stuff, Steyrs. There's just so many other pistols I don't have to make conscious adjustments to get sight picture out of them. Like I said, they're well-made guns. They're well-engineered. They're reliable. They're accurate as a pistol ever needs to be. And you can make them even better if you want to invest the money like we're going to do today and put a little bit of work in here to make this trigger better. Yeah, I'm really not going to go to a whole lot of history on it. Normally I would, but there's so much about these guns, and there's so many things you can go back and forth on, and it's all conjecture and opinion. I mean, outside of like the actual facts, the way things ran, but you know, there's heard tale of in the 80s and 90s when Glock created, you know, Glock USA was trying to get a lot of PDs to pick these guns up as their duty pistols, and, you know, get all these contracts and everything else. That they would go down to Florida, or excuse me, Georgia, and the company Glock had a bunch of condos and stuff that they bought out there. And when they would bring these head honchos, these PDs and everything else in, they would put them up there, and they would show them a good time. They'd show them around the facilities, and they would, you know, they'd take them out to dinner, and they'd want to dine them. But there's sheer tale that they would also let them loose in the nightclubs and everything else out there in Georgia, man. And there was like hooker and blow parties and everything else, and these guys were just giving everything under the sun, including kickbacks to make contracts for these guns. How much of that is true, I have no idea. I'm not going to speak for that. I don't know. I wasn't there. the CEO of Glock USA at one point, Gaston Glock. He's kind of a piece of shit in general as a human being. Relatively good at engineering, piss poor as a human. He was embezzling money, probably from the very beginning, embezzling money in everything that he ever did. Married to his wife, had a couple of kids. The CEO of Glock USA, the guy in Georgia, was also embezzling money, and somehow found out that Glock was embezzling money more than this guy was, and he wanted his piece of the action, and they had this scuffle one night where the CEO of Glock USA actually tried to kill Gaston Glock by beating him to death with a hammer. He failed, went to jail for it, but, I mean, Gaston Glock divorced his wife. When he did that, he married this new younger broad, ended up basically firing all his kids out of the company, disowning them and everything else. His ex-wife, ended up getting a bunch of money in the divorce and the settlement or whatever else there. Later on found out that he had all these other, really it was embezzling, but he got away with it somehow. They were just investing shit tons of money. And so she found out about all these other accounts that he had started while they were still married, and ended up going back after him in court and winning a whole bunch more money. There was all kinds of things going on. The guy's a piece of shit in general, man. There's a whole book on that stuff out there. I don't know all the facts. Obviously, I wasn't there, man. I was a wee little one when all this shit was going down. But we'll get into the pistol here, and we'll start taking it apart. Alright, so taking this gun apart is pretty simple. Make sure it's unloaded. Pull your trigger. I grab the gun like this, and I'll pull the slide back ever so slightly to take the slide lock, get the pressure off the slide lock, pull it down, and just push forward. Comes right off. Recoil spring and guide rod assembly there. Barrel comes out there. Now you've got your striker, your firing pin block here, your extractor, end plate, and some other various little things we'll get into inside of here, but that's pretty much it. There's this little plastic piece right here, a little keeper. If you pull towards the muzzle end of the gun, down on that, and take your finger and push that end plate off, comes off. This little guy, like you saw, is going to want to come springing out, and that's your ejector, your extractor rod and spring. Your striker assembly will come out like that. And this firing pin stop here, if you just push down on that with your thumb, you can just grab your ejector and slide that little guy right out. Your firing pin stop will come out. Just kind of knock it out there, and he'll come right out of there. I'm going to set that aside. We're not using that again. And that's pretty much it for the slide. There's some other interesting things. You'll see on a lot of Glocks, you can see those little divots that are cut into the sight here. That's not just some kind of accidental little bump that they put into those things with the mill or something. That actually tells you the sight height. These particular marks would tell me that it's a 0.270 inch high sight, and that's from the bottom of the dovetail, or the bottom of the sight here to the top here. I've measured this one from here to here, and it actually comes up like 265. So I don't know how reliable that information is, but that's it. The front sight here, it just screws in. There's a special little tool you got to get to get that nut off there. You can't just run any kind of dealy bop in there, but that's all there is to it, man. Let's see, I'm gonna wipe this guy off. It's got a bunch of shmoo, man. There's no reason to over lubricate these guns. Actually, that's any gun, man. I've said it before in some of my videos. That's a lot of people's problems. They just over lube the shit out of the guns, and you just don't need to. Your striker here, striker spring, its little keepers. So an interesting thing is that so Glock used to have, you hear that, oh, they'll fire underwater and blah blah blah. Well, really any gun will fire underwater at least once. But But this keeper right here is kind of what allowed a lot of that to happen. The older ones had, instead of being round, so it took up all of that channel inside of your slide here, it had kind of four little tits that stuck out here, four little tabs, and then the rest of it was empty, and then a lot of water to flow back and forth between here, so the striker and everything would continue to work. They stopped doing that because a lot of people, you know, oh, it wasn't necessary, so they quit doing it, and blah blah blah. How often you fire your gun underwater, and this and that. And from my understanding, the truth of that story was a bunch of freaking idiots were taking their Glocks, and they would go out to their swimming pools or lakes or whatever else they could, just to see, like, they wanted to watch it shoot underwater, and they'd stick the gun out and they'd pull the damn trigger. Well, if you know anything about pressure waves in water and what it does to eardrums, they didn't find it so funny or interesting after that. They were blowing eardrums out and all kinds of other stuff. So they quit doing that shit. You can't, they don't typically come with those keepers anymore that allow you to shoot it underwater. You can buy those and replace them, but why? I mean, how often are you going to shoot underwater? These things come off pretty easy. You just pull the little spring back there, and the little keepers will come off. There's two pieces. Hold on to that spring so it doesn't go springing. But two little keeper halves there. Save those. We're going to hold on to that. Striker spring will come off there. Toss that aside because we're not using it again. And I'm going to wipe her down. And then that little sleeve there just comes off. There is, just so you know, there is another little plastic sleeve inside of these guns here. And that's what your striker and all that rides on. These are actually pressed in more or less. If something happens to this one, you can get replacements, but there's kind of a little tool that you need to get to press that back down in there. A lot of guys, especially ones that don't know a whole lot about Glocks, and they go to do their, you know, home Cerakote kits or whatever else, and they'll paint these things and they'll stick them in the oven at the 350, 400 degrees for an hour, whatever the hell it is, to bake that shit on, and not take that thing out. One, it's all but impossible to get out anyway, so it doesn't matter. But they stick it in the oven and the damn thing will shrink and it'll stop working. If you heat this slide up at all, for whatever reason, that thing will shrink and just kind of fall out, and it's useless, and your striker and stuff won't ride inside of there anymore. So keep that in mind, especially if you guys are getting into Cerakote and things like that, man. You're pretty much going to have to replace those things. And I'm sure there's people like, oh, I never have to replace them. Well, you're getting lucky, or you're not paying attention and you're screwing people's guns up. This, yeah, don't take that apart. I'm not even, the new ones I think screw together on the end here, and yeah, forget that thing. I'm going to put a new striker spring on here. That's why I just kind of tossed this thing aside. Same thing with that firing pin stop and its spring. Got a new one here. That's going to go into it. So, moving on here, we'll get to the frame, and these are relatively simple as well. Take a little handy punch, come out of here. You've got your locking block pin, and you've got your trigger pin here, and then you've got your rear trigger block pin here. I will usually punch this locking block pin out first, and they should just come right out. You shouldn't have to beat on these guns to get these parts to come out. They should come out relatively easy. A note, when you're taking this trigger pin out, always go from left to right. You want that pin to come this way, and I'll show you here in a second why. You don't go beating on this. Don't get a block and get your punch, because this thing doesn't just push out and go beating the shit out of this gun. You would damage it. What you need to do is take your punch and put light pressure on there, and your slide stop here, this little guy, slide stop, rides in that groove. You need to put pressure on this guy, just a little bit, and wiggle that around, and see how that pin kind of popped through there. Finish pushing it out the other side. What it is that once that pin's out, you can pull your slide stop out as well. Is that pin has two little grooves in it, and you can see those grooves right here and here. So you can't put it in backwards. It doesn't matter which direction this pin goes in, but it needs to go back in from right to left and come out from left to right. And that's so you're not having to fight those grooves twice, because what happens is this slide stop rides inside of there into that little groove, and that's what retains that pin. Because of all the movement and stuff, this pin wants to rotate around in there, and there's nothing wrong with that other than it'll start walking out of the gun. So the spring here puts tension on it, and that your slide stop rides in that groove. And if you, I get it all the time, man. I'm having to replace these things and sometimes these things, because people will just take a punch and they bigger hammer method, and they'll just beat the shit out of these guns and just drive it through. And what's ends up happening is you bow the shit out of this. You'll get a big hump, and when you put it back together, it won't ride in that groove anymore. So it'll sit just off of it, or it won't stay there, and your pins start walking out on you. Or you damage something in the frame or whatever, man. Just don't do it, man. Just kind of wiggle that guy out. It should just push right out. After that, we're going to push this trigger block pin out. Like, same thing, it should just push right out of there. Now, a little bit of leverage, and you can pull the locking block. This guy here, this is your locking block, the big metal part. Pull that up a little bit. Same thing. It might be a little stiff, especially the first time you pull it apart. But it should just come out of there, no problems. Your trigger and trigger bar, and then your rear trigger block should just lift out just like that. You get all one piece. The only thing that's really left in here is this slide lock dealy bop here. Typically there's a little spring right here. You can push down on that spring, and this thing will just, it doesn't matter right or left or anything there. It should just push out like that and just slide out. There is, I don't know if you can see there in the camera, the stupid thing now. See that little lip on that guy? You can see it's got a little lip on one side of it there. There we go. That lip faces the back of the gun. So when you put that back together, and I'll show you when you get it back together, that spring just kind of comes out of there. It's a little tab, and it just slides in there. I'm not going to pull it out just because it's a pain in the dick to get it out, and unless you're replacing it for some reason, there's no reason to dick with it. You might bend it or screw it up. The other thing is, or the last thing in this frame here, is your magazine release. And you'll see there we go, is that long spring. That's all that is, man. It's just a long spring rod. And what you'll do, let's see if I can light this up while I do it. Probably not. There's a little tab or a cut out there in both your magazine release and that spring. And because I don't have like 4 hands, I'm not gonna, you see what I'm talking about. But that little guy, anyways, here, I'll try and do it. You want to pop that spring out so that it's above that slide stop, and that slide stop will just push out now, and you can just pull it right out. This isn't, again, if you're trying to swap it out or something, it's not really necessary. Do not mess with that spring in there. Don't try to pull it out or anything else. Be careful not to bend it, because they're a bitch to get in and they're a bitch to get out. But that's all there is to it, man. That's a completely disassembled Glock frame. Like I said, save for that little guy there, but whatever. Putting it back together, same thing, man. You let shit jump out of your hands. No, your magazine release, you're going to try and get it in here, and you're going to have to lift that little spring up like so and just slide it underneath there. And once it's in and it's seated where it needs to, you can just take that little spring and just push it back over into its little hole. You'll hear it snap like that, and there you go. You get it captured. your slide lock. Just kind of set it in there. You can push your spring down like that and just slide it in until it catches. Now we're going to put our new fancy trigger in there. I'm not going to tell you whose company it is, honestly, because they don't pay me, and it's, yeah, if they want to start paying me, then I might consider talking about them. But it's got all kinds of adjustments done to it all, and fancy springs and everything else. So just stick it back in there, and it should just seat right down without any issues whatsoever. Just like that. Get your hole lined up there. Pin here. And we might have to tap that back in. Yeah, there we go. But again, it shouldn't be difficult pushing that in. All these pins should be relatively easy to put back in. And this one's going to mess me a little bit. So, the next thing I want to do here is grab my locking block. Make sure that the little things are facing forward like that. And we're going to slide that guy back in there. This trigger pin, when you go to put it back in, make sure everything lines up in the hole there. And like I said, go right to left with it. For the same reason, when you put it back in the gun, if you put it in, let's see if I can get this thing to stand up for us. If you put it in from left to right, you have to put your slide stop in here. Well, if you put it in from left to right, you're fighting both of those stupid little notches. So you have to get it to click and then wiggle it and get it to click again. When you go from right to left, and you only have to deal with that once. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to pull that out because I want to line the holes up. Line the holes up. Put your slide stop in there. Make sure it gets lined up with the pin. And bang, that's it. It's in there. Your locking block pin. When you put your locking block pin back in there and you're pushing it through, make sure the spring leg from your slide release, your slide stop there, make sure that spring leg is down below your locking block pin. You can get it up and over, and it can cause some problems. Get it in there, and that's all there is to a reassembled Glock frame. Let's see, what do we do next? We'll do the striker. This is the new striker spring. We're gonna put this little sleeve back over it, like so. Slide our new striker spring on there. And here comes the fun part, is getting these keepers back on there while holding on to all this BS and pressing the spring. Luckily, these springs aren't very stout, so usually you can wrap one up, put it on top there, grab your other one, sit it on there, make sure it gets good and seated, just like so. No problemo. The slide here, we're going to take, because this is the first thing that needs to go back in the slide. You got your new stoppy fire pin stop there. And the new spring to go with it. And we'll feed that stupid thing back in here. Make sure it functions like it ought to. Which it's giving me some trouble, so what's going on? What is your problem? Apparently the problem is the spring didn't want to stay inside of it. Alright. That trick I showed you one time about the gunsmith glue, that's what we're going to do. Little bit of grease. Bearing grease, this is what, lithium? Calcium grease. Calcium, good for you. Whatever. But a little bit of grease in there. That way that spring doesn't come falling back out and dick with this shit. There we go. Alright, that works right. I'm going to wipe this little extractor off here. Stick it back in. Let go of your frying pan stop. Nope, didn't capture. Alright, after fucking launching that spring and looking around forever trying to find this damn thing. I hate Glocks. I don't know if I mentioned that before. Alright, so put your extractor in there, holds that guy in. Extractor rod and spring here. Striker spring assembly, whatever you want to call that. Now what I'll do is I'll take your end plate and I'll just hold it on here and take a punch or something and just push in on the striker, the back of that little striker deal there, and then your extractor rod and its spring, and it should just clip in just like that, so shouldn't have any issues there. Put your barrel back in, guide rod assembly, and we'll test this guy out and make sure, since we replaced a bunch of stupid ass parts. Must not have that aligned correctly. Seems to be a very common issue. Get in there. There we go. There we go. Voila. That is a horrible feeling trigger. Like it almost stages. Like click, click. What the fuck? That's a shitty trigger. I mean, it's definitely lighter. A lot lighter, but the over travel's not all that great. It's different. I guess it's just not that factory Glock feel, man. It's a lot wider too. The pad, it's flat instead of the what Glock calls their competition trigger. The ones that have these little serrations and shit on them, that's actually their quote competition trigger. And that has more to do with the way the guns are imported. Like this actually has no function other than maybe some tactile feel on your finger when you're shooting it. But it has, I mean, it's identical to the non-competition triggers, and it has to do with the way these guns are imported. This one here, you know, is made in Austria, but it's like I said, go search that stuff, man. There's so much I just don't have time to explain to you in a video. But that's all there is to it. These guns are super simple. Very few parts, which is part of the reason they get adopted all over the place. They're really simple. You don't have to be some kind of genius to swap these parts out. There are ways to take your factory triggers, improve them. They do make a spring kit where you can take your factory stuff and replace just the spring here, and you can replace your what the fuck do they call that, man? Disconnector or whatever the hell else this thing is, or connector. They call that the connector, and then the crucifix part here is what they call that. But if you go in here, man, you can polish on the inside of here the factory stuff. I'm gonna leave that up to you, man, because if you do that wrong, you're just gonna screw it up because you don't know what you're doing. But if you've got factory parts, if you've done a swap like this and it's laying around or something like that, or know somebody who has factory parts that are laying around because they did a different trigger, see if they won't let you play with them, dude, just to see what happens, man. And you can go in here and same thing here on this trigger bar. If you polish up this surface real good and you polish up your connector and all the parts here that touch each other, polish the top of this. This is what interacts on that striker safety, that plunger that we replaced. When you pull the trigger, it pushes that plunger up and allows the striker to go forward there. Same thing here. You can polish this and the bottom side of this crucifix here, and it'll make it a little bit smoother. You're not going to get some super fancy, but you can make the factory triggers actually not too bad. It's still a striker fire gun. You're not going to get that beautiful single action trigger pull that you would out of a revolver or other single action pistols like the 1911 and things like that. You're not going to get that. And I don't care what striker fire gun you get. If it's a Smith or a Springfield or whatever, they're striker fired, and just the way they operate, you're never going to get that crisp of a trigger out of them. Not like you would a true single action gun. So yeah, they pretty simple guns, man. They're pretty well built. They will run typically, you know, forever. can't say I've got a lot of bitches. So yeah, there she is, man. Give me a like, subscribe, make some comments, give me some shares, whatever you got to do, man.